Yes, I already get kicks from my chair that we should try to make up some of the time. I'm now opening the next session, and we want to move back to discussion that we started yesterday on the program of work. We promised that we would continue the discussion or open the discussion to today on the presentation done by Deborah yesterday. So you've already got an overview what is behind the about 20 pages that we received in advance of the advisory board meeting. I would also like to highlight that we've had a task force call among advisory board members where we had a first chance to express comments that have been already partly or fully incorporated in the document. This is the document ABE 2018-12 8.2, where you see an overview of the comments made. So in this discussion, we've had there have been some comments on the theory of change, what the role is. There was overall a positive recognition that this document and how the structure would be useful for the further guidance of the CTCN, but we've already received the comment that it's very hard to now do a multi-annual planning of the CTCN while we're still waiting for guidance on the technology framework. But today we heard from the Secretariat that we have this triple jump between the vision, the multi-annual work program, and the annual program. And so in a way, this document should give a vision to the advisory board, through the advisory board to the parties, but also to the outside stakeholders, where the CTCN is moving to. But it's also needed for the hosting organizations. So before opening the floor to advisory board members, I would maybe ask the hosting organizations to come back to discussion yesterday about how they see the benefit for their work in having a multi-annual program of work in addition to an annual program.
Thank you very much, Karsten. Maybe I could begin with reaction from the sort of smaller to the larger. So there was a good deal of discussion yesterday about the theory of change, and I would confess to being somewhat ignorant about where did the theory of change concept come from. And a few weeks ago, I actually had a conversation with one of our senior evaluation experts in Nairobi, and she said that it's basically something that came out of the evaluation community as a way of systematically examining assumptions and identifying any missing elements in your logical thinking. So it very much a tool as you set out saying, what will we do and what do we hope is the outputs of what we do and how do those lead to outcomes, and everything builds progressively toward some larger, in our terminology in the UN environment, the impacts. So for her, and she emphasized that it's very much a tool that forces you to examine the logic and particularly, as I said, identify any missing elements. Now, the long-term goals of the CTCN are in a sense defined by parties. This is not something that's left to us to determine. And we in our thinking and management of the CTCN collectively have to figure out and present to you what types of activities will we do and what type of assumptions and what's the balance of different types of activities to deliver on those three lines that Manfredi explained earlier. What mix of activities allow us in a sense to contribute to the long-term goals determined by parties for the CTCN. And I would give an example. There was general, I would say, certainly good reception for the activities undertaken with NDEs, some of the regional events, activities that brought NDEs together with NDAs and so on. So we would propose to continue that. It's proved to be very, very helpful. But in that goes an assumption that there are NDEs. And those of you with good memories will recall that in the early years of the CTCN, a lot of countries had not nominated NDEs. And so if we are assuming that NDEs are essential to the equation, and there are not NDEs in half of the countries, we're pretty soon going to run into a problem. So the theory of change sort of says, okay, have you have you mapped on what you're going to do with what's implied in terms of assumptions? That's just, sort of one example why sitting down systematically and thinking through using this sort of framework. Personally, I don't think the terminology is the correct one. If it were up to me, I would come up with a different name, but theory of change is what it is. Now, we have to use that in UN environment. I don't know if you use it in UNIDO, but it's required in our normal programming. It is not required for the annual exercise of thinking critically about what to present to the advisory board in terms of an operating plan. But we got used to the process, to sit down and, as I said, think through systematically what you're going to do and the causal links that lead to something you really hope to achieve in the larger perspective. So we use that as an internal sort of mechanism in coming up with this work program. It wasn't necessary that we did that. You did not ask for it, but it's a little bit like sitting down with someone who could be a guide to structured thinking. In this case, it's some frameworks and some tables and some questions to ask. Very generic, because it can apply to any situation. So we found it useful, and we thought maybe in our naivety to present that to you in the draft work program. Not thinking it actually might be even mildly controversial, but I would urge you to see it as a tool, not as something that really has any built-in value judgments or presumptions on our part. And I think the same can be said of the work program or the program of work. I mentioned yesterday, and Manfredi pulled out the actual text reference that gave some reference in an earlier COP decision to the role of the advisory board. And it's a bit ambiguous about the role in terms of the advisory board endorsing or approving or giving some kind of let's say yes or no to the longer term work program. From my own perspective, I think it's very useful, and I did mention this yesterday, but it's very useful to have a sort of, it could be 3 years or 4 years or 5 years if you're bold, planning horizon. If you're only planning year by year, it's very myopic. You get to the end of the year and you have to think almost about the next year from afresh. So understanding the limitations of inherent in any multi-year planning exercise, I think it does provide a general direction, a way that we could organize our thinking in terms of what do we do year on year, how does 1 year build on the next, understanding that in the end it's really the annual operating plan and the associated budget that's much more important. Now, I don't think that we absolutely need it. Is it helpful? Yes. Is it essential? No. But in a sense, we went through the exercise of thinking. We can't really undo our thinking. I mean, I suppose we could, hope for amnesia, but it aided us in thinking through. Here I venture into the dangerous waters of sort of what is the role of the advisory board and not. I think if we left here with a sense that we're aimed in the right direction, that the COP will meet in Katowice and make some other decisions, that further clarity will come, that we will have changes in staff, that we will secure, with luck and goodwill, additional sources of funding. In a sense, it's a rolling program. So it's helped us. It helped bring us to this state where we could have a reasonable discussion with the advisory board. But if we left today without it endorsed by you, I think we could live with that. If we left with a sense that you think it's a good work in progress, and we got very many good comments and we took notes, we can continue to work on it and refine it. So this is, in a sense, I would say, an opinion of the host organization or one of the two host organizations. Maybe a bit of a personal perspective, but it is how I personally have approached these documents, and I thank you for your forbearance and listening to my explanation.
Tarek, you want to add a few words?
No, just to second Mark completely and in agreement with him, and this is the shared view between all of us. And I think if I want to add a little bit of an extra line, is because I come new to the whole process of managing a project like this within UNIDO and in the whole UNIDO operations. Drawing back on my previous experience working with business strategy and teaching business strategy at the university, I always think that a strategic document is useful. I mean, it helps define and guide an organization, but I think this could also be interpreted as an internal exercise of the CTCN to sharpen their thinking. I think the interpretation of the mandate is given, as Mark said, it's already out there, but an interpretation of that mandate can give a wide range of activities. And from our point of view as host organization, to ensure that CTCN deliver the highest impact with the resources available to it, the highest impact with the limited resources or with the range of resources available, financial and non-financial resources, also networks and relationship about resources. So to ensure that it delivers, this exercise is useful. And in a way, the guidance that could be useful is from an advisory board like this around this exercise. It's not necessarily the endorsement of a document like this, but it's where should CTCN focus in this broad range of activities that can actually deliver the highest impact. A theory of change that guides the interpretation of this is a useful one because it allows you to see you have 7 activities that you can engage with. Maybe 2 or 3 are most effective given the nature and the resources endowed to this network. So from that perspective, I saw the value of this exercise. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark and Tarek. Before I open the floor, we would start with Orly, just to frame a bit the debate, how we move forward. And maybe for first round of comment, I wouldn't like to go very deep into formulations, textual track changes, but maybe on the concept, because in front of us we have, in the end, a document, we have this element of the theory of change as a tool to capture the development, strategic management decisions. We have an element that moves from the first program of work to the second program of work, and we have ideas for what activities are there and in the second program of work. So what I would like you to, maybe in the first round of comment, just to test the atmosphere and the opinions of the advisory board members, is to maybe see what are your high-level comments on the elements, where should we focus on, where would you see maybe some gaps of elements that they're missing, or maybe which parts you don't consider as necessary at being part of this further process. With this framing, I would give the floor to Orly.
Thank you. I hope I didn't worry you by putting my flag up so quickly. I actually just wanted to take the opportunity to respond to Mark and Tarek just very quickly to say that I, for one, really appreciate your comments, and I think the candid nature of the comments is really helpful to this conversation. I think that this kind of internal thinking exercise is completely reasonable, and I think the more you share with the board, the better it is and the easier it is for us to see how you're thinking internally. So really, from my end, I think it's very helpful, very useful, and knowing that it's not polished and finished is great. I think that's just a work in progress that everybody's working towards together. So thank you for those comments.
This time I would give the floor to Sumaya straight away.
Thank you, Chair. Just two short suggestions. One, picking up from what Tarek was saying, and I was thinking of the same thing, how the impact can be maximized with such a small resources. If you look at the commercial financing that is coming to mitigation now, mitigation both in terms of innovation and in terms of support is getting fairly large amount of financing support from multiple sources, whereas adaptation is not really getting the kind of thing. In fact, if you to look at the global finance flow, climate finance flow, is something like 69 to 70% is flowing into mitigation. So I would think that CTCN, with a small resource, should concentrate far more on adaptation measures and DRR measures, because these are going to be more critical for the kind of countries that we are targeting at. That's one. Second is, I'll suggest, again, just suggestion, that though it's useful to have a 4-year or 5-year timeline or plan, Again, considering that things are going to be the scenario is going to be changing very soon, what are the kind of higher priorities that will be coming up after the IPCC report and the COP, as COP responds to that. So have a 1 year clear focus program, but leave that window open for the next 3 years to really include what are the priority areas that are coming up. Again, mostly in terms of severe impacts in terms of adaptation and DRR in the poorer countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Spencer, I think you are next.
Thank you, Chair. With respect to this document, of course, I think it is very useful, and I think we should continue working on it. I think it can be more strategic. I think it should be more strategic. I will also argue that it should be a leaner and very mean document in terms of its length, so that people will read it. I see the issue of theory of change as creating some noise in this document, for the want of a better word. And maybe we should concentrate more on the strategic nature of the work of CTCN than on the tool. The tool, of course, could help us, but I don't think we should mainstream the tool in the document as it is at this moment. Maybe it can be relegated to some other aspects of the document as an explanatory part of the document and an annex or something to show how we get to the strategic nature of the document. I also believe that while this is a very useful document, because I felt that the first work program was very useful, and it's still very useful, although we were not able to match the ambition in that document, but it still provided a context for our work on the annual basis. And I think the 4-year program, as indicated here, can also provide that framework for us. And of course, as you say, it's linked to the period of the extension of the agreement. It's also linked to the length of the trust fund, which expires also in 4 years' time, at least this part of it. We do have the Katowice meeting we have very significant outcomes expected there, which will inform the next 3 to 4 years. So I believe that what we can do at this meeting is to bring this document to the best shape we can by the end of this meeting, and then await the outcome of the Katowice meeting in terms of the periodic assessment and technology framework, etc. And then we can have an intersessional process after Katowice and prior to the next AB meeting, where we can have the task force or a specific intersessional process to work further on this document, so that we might have something at the next AB meeting more in line with the strategy and more in line with what we normally would expect going forward in the next 4 to 5 years. So I believe in some high-level comment you asked for, yes, the document is useful to have as a framework, and I believe it needs to have a lot of work to get it done there. I have some very clear editing proposals that I will submit. I don't think that's the time for it now, but I really believe that we should continue. When we look at the COP decision in terms of the terms of reference for the advisory board, it is clear that the COP meant that we should be approving something of that nature. They call it a business plan or something like that, a program of work, for example, a business plan. So I really believe we should have some sort of multi-year framework to inform the annual plan. So that I think we should be doing. So I will stop here.
Thank you for this guidance. On my list, I would have next the Ring representative, followed by Mette, then Ian, and then I have Claudia on my list. So Matt, you would be the next speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. It's always difficult to go after Spencer because he makes so much sense, and then it makes me look like I'm not making any sense. But I think certainly the view, it's always, you're putting your head above the parapet when you put together a strategy, seek advice on it, and it's a work in progress. So certainly I'd like to commend the team of the Secretariat for being courageous in terms of the strategy and asking for input, and I think it's appropriate. We're not just an advisory board for finance guidance or to give out to the Secretariat for not getting enough money, but we also have different roles. What I think in terms of this draft, at least, it's like a hybrid of a strategic plan and an operational plan. And maybe based on something Spencer said there about a multi-year framework, it can be divided into two. One with a high-level strategy, which really might form an idea around the concept, and one with how you would translate that strategy into a plan that has clearly defined targets and deliverables. And certainly when I was working for my government, I did their efficiency action plan and their renewable action plan to feed to the Commission, and there was a general national strategy and the two plans that fell out of that national strategy, so it makes sense. I've been part of this CTCN for quite a while, so I do remember, and I was reminded of it again last night, that at the very start there was a proposal and a concept tabled which was based on a logical framework concept, going back to the very start. And I think that model, while still appropriate, the theory of change one, because we're going through an element of change. We're having change directly within the Secretariat and leadership change. We're not sure the outcome of the next two COPs. We want to have together a strategy that can be flexible and that we can feed back and change as appropriate. And I think that as a model, it's one of a number we could adopt, but it's certainly fit for purpose at the current age and of the, I think the CTCN is moving from being maybe an infant into being a teenager or something, I don't know, but it's going through a bit of change. What I like about the concept itself is that it shows really, it's a forecast, okay, and it shows what are the various conditions that we believe must happen for us to deliver on our core remit. And then we try to reach for those outcomes. In terms of the content then, so that's enough kind of about the framework. The content, there's an element of a scattergram. I think all the detail is within, but it might not be in the appropriate places. So, you know, even when I read through it, it's clearly articulating a vision for the CTCN, but maybe I'm on page 6 or page 7 before I come to that vision. So the content is there. Maybe it could do with some help in terms of a structure. It introduces new ideas such as smaller projects and then yet talking about transformational impact. So I think that more debate needs to happen around that in terms of the level of the intervention. And my final point would be what it's missing really is the how we are going to go about doing this. So it clearly outlines what has been done to date. It talks about what we'd like to do, but it doesn't really talk about the how you would go about doing it. And certainly from my constituency, how you would go about engaging with the stakeholders. And especially, as I mentioned before, inside, outside the convention. But generally, and presenting a strategy for engagement might be an important tool as well, that results. But it's, I guess it's a work in progress, and I really appreciate it being brought to the advisory board.
Thank you, Matt. So I have now Mette, Ian, and Claudia. For this first round, I would close the list with this, and then I would briefly open it to observers in the room before we see how we move on. So on my list now, next is Mette.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and thank you very much to the Secretariat for putting this together. And I'd like to echo Canada and thanking the hosting organization for their introductory remark. I think it helps our discussion and how we see the document. I also agree that I think a multi-year plan can be useful. Of course, it need to be something that can will be reflecting the framework when that's done, and reflect other important documents that will certainly have influence on the priorities of the CTCN. I also think that the theory of change is a tool. I think it helps us or the CTCN to tell a story, you know, what should we achieve and how. I think that in the document that could either be put in an annex or can just be appreciated now in an early draft and seen as a tool, and then maybe the document will change after that. I think also that, like Matt said, we need to put up the vision or the goals straight up to the front, and then go more into the strategic house after that. Regarding the use of the terms output, outcomes, and impacts, of course, in the development assistant world, that is a very well-known concepts, and I have, you know, in that manner, I think impacts is really what happens all the way to the GHG reduced emissions and increased resilience of people. And you know, we might want to see whether the CTCN should focus on that, or we should focus on the outcome level. There are some tables in there that gives priority to some adaptation and mitigation issues. I think that we should look carefully into how these priorities has come about. I find on the adaptation side, it looks to me that some of them looks like the same. On the mitigation side, I don't really understand the rationale behind the choosing priorities, and you know, I think this is a discussion that should be informed by TEC among others and the IPCC report, etc. Then just a comment on the regional approach. We have discussed that yesterday and a little bit today. I think that, you know, we should have a discussion about what do we mean by that, what kind of budget implication does it have, and how much it is noted that we can rely or we can use the support of the host organizations, regional centers, but maybe those can be even more prominent, and it would be good to hear something more about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Claudia. Oh, sorry, it's Ian first.
Thank you, and I'd echo the comments thanking the Secretariat for clarifying the background information on the report, the draft program of work, and the theory of change is very helpful, and very much acknowledge it's a work in progress, and we're all kind of wanting to work together to try and all develop the best product possible. And I think in that spirit, you know, I think we can make a lot of good progress at this meeting. I do want to provide some comments on the content without getting too specific, as I know we're trying to provide general comments. To the theory of change, I'm flexible on this. This was, you know, a new proposal for me coming into this meeting, and I didn't really get from the paper what exactly it was, but now I think I have a better grasp of it. So, you know, we can keep it, we can get rid of it, we can put it in an annex. Maybe that's a good way forward. But I do think one kind of key point in the in the text on the theory of change, which is missing, is a description of the problems the CTCN is addressing, and what the unique role of the CTCN is relative to other programs or bodies addressing problems. The other issue with the theory of change I had is that there's actually a disconnect in the paper, somewhat a contradiction between the outputs and outcomes in Figure 4 and the content of the theory of change, which focuses a lot on policy support, technology awareness, capacity building, whereas the quantitative indicators earlier in the report show a kind of specific project focus and their impacts. So there's kind of a difference there, you know, at least what's talked about in the theory of change is a kind of space for broader impact of policy support and capacity building, which goes beyond support for individual projects that don't have any follow-up. So we kind of want to be in the process of helping to scale up to more in-depth work. So specific projects may be fine if they're you know, critical pilots for market transformation or coupled with policy action in some way. But I just wanted to highlight a bit of a contradiction in the text there. Could also be helpful to clarify the role of the CTCN in strengthening enabling environments, as well as supporting innovation and private sector engagement. Those are themes we've been hearing a lot about and are coming in the pipeline through the new framework and so on, and how we link those to support by country governments, donors, and businesses as well. So what I'm kind of trying to get at here as well is that we want to see the CTCN being strategic in how it engages, where there's good pathways for action and support, which fit in the kind of broader ecosystem of work going on. So that's on the theory of change. I do want to make a few other comments on the quantitative findings. We've already talked about that early in the meeting, so there's a broader discussion there. I think talking about the number of policy recommendations adopted or endorsed would be a good addition there. But as we discussed before, we need to be careful about attribution and you know, also be clear whether the projects have been fully implemented or are just underway. In terms of mitigation and adaptation priorities, that's definitely an area we can consider further. The adaptation priorities, at least from my end, looked reasonably good and kind of in line with at least what we're hearing from our programmatic side on what areas of support are needed, but maybe there's parts we're missing, and you know, definitely flexible on how we can best change that. For the mitigation, I'm not sure if the high-level champions lens is the right one. I think what we want to aim for is having a high impact in terms of supporting NDC goals, national climate goals, and you know, I think from the perspective of at least of our work in supporting countries' climate and development goals, on the mitigation side, areas such as renewable energy grid integration, supportive policies such as auctions, clean energy mini-grids, distributed generation, electric mobility, clean energy investment mobilization, clean energy for agricultural production. Those are some of the areas we've seen as major priorities, and that for me, when you look at that with what's in the NDCs, I don't see that the high-level champions route is the right way to take. The technology framework, of course, isn't going to be finalized till COP24. There may be outputs from that which will be useful to this, so we should be able to somehow be flexible and keep this document open to changes resulting from the framework. However, we do already have information from it. We know that there's a key theme on innovation, for example, so we're already seeing private sector engagement being a key component. In terms of the engagement and learning and work on regional partnerships, I think what would be good to see, so this is a 4-year forward-looking plan, and we've talked a lot about partnerships with MDBs, regional development banks, ODAs, as well as related programs like the LEDS program, the NDC Compact, the Clean Energy Ministerial, PFAN, but particularly for the larger development banks, it would be helpful to see a bigger commitment here from the CTCN to try and partner and work with these groups, rather than saying that we will try and better coordinate and seek to work with. I think we try and be a bit bolder and forward-leaning in terms of actually strengthening these partnerships and making a commitment to work hand in hand, both with, and of course, the financial mechanism, but also outside of the UNFCCC system. I'll leave it there. I won't go into any more specific comments than that, but I would like to make a proposal to move forward. I think it's important that we make as much progress here as possible. It's somewhat unfortunate that we're having this discussion late on the second day, so I feel bad a bit about what I'm going to ask, but I would actually think we can make a huge amount of progress if the Secretariat were to update the paper overnight, and then we come back to it tomorrow with a revised draft, and at least have a discussion on that and see how far we can get together. I think that if we agree to keep doing the work in a call in the next few weeks or the next month or two, we're never going to have everyone on the call at the same time, and everyone's going to be either traveling or preparing for Poland, and we're here in Vienna together, so let's make the most of this time. And I suggest, if it's at all possible, to try and update the text overnight. We can actually make a lot of progress here. Thanks.
Thank you, Ian, for the details and also for the proposal. It's good that you made the proposal. Otherwise, colleagues would have maybe blamed the chair and the vice chair for this proposal. So, this is Claudia. You're next.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I want to also appreciate the work of the Secretariat, and also join Canada and Norway on the thanks for Mark and Tarek on their introductory remarks. I think they were very useful for us to think about how you think about this process, and also the theory of change introduction, which was a little bit new for us in this documentation. I think going forward, it is critical, very important to have this strategic planning. And I do support more work on this. I think this is, of course, work in progress. We've heard different views about things that are missing, things that should be emphasized. I think, in general terms, it should provide strategy, mainly strategy. Of course, the annual operating plan will go through the specifics about how you implement that strategy. So I will keep it also, as Spencer suggested, lean. Focus on the strategic components of the CTCN medium and potential long-term planning process. In that regard, I will probably not have all of the discussion of the theory of change here. It will be used as an internal tool so that we can better understand the process that came up for the priorities. But I think the main goal of this type of documents is to provide guidance and explain the way forward. And just as an example, I think these things are useful not to have annual operating plans that are just business as usual. I think they need to identify what are the strategic projects that will make the CTCN grow over time. And I think this is a problem that we are having now, right? We have a very ambitious program at the beginning, and then we started worrying about what was going on, and now we are in a situation when we are planning just for the next year. And I think this is what we need to avoid with this strategic thinking. We need to think about how we grow the CTCN based on facts and reality and how it's happening, but also identifying the actions that need to be taken and be very punctual about how we do those in the next 2, 3, 4 years. So I think those are the things that would be very useful to have here. And I will leave it like that for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. And I will open the floor now for observers, but I see Ollie wants to come back.
Thank you. Apologies for that. I just have a quick comment and one quick question and one suggestion. The first question is just on paragraph 31, where we talk about how activities might be too thinned out if you spread it out over every level. Then it talks about CTCN activities being broadly occurring at the following 3 levels. And I'm just wondering what level was left out of this. So it seems to be comprehensive, like activities will still continue at all these different levels, but perhaps I'm just misunderstanding what is trying to be said here. So I just wanted to understand better what, how many levels are there in total, maybe that spreading out across all of them would be thinning out too much. And the suggestion I have is perhaps it might actually help other people reading this if maybe the whole section about the first program of work would be annexed and just have the main document be the second program of work. And that way you don't need to go through the background to get to the actual section, and maybe that would satisfy some readers who just want to get to the main punch of it. So it's just a simple thing, but it might help. Thank you. Oh, I just mean the first section here, page 2 to 6, perhaps would be beneficial to be.
Maybe in the next one we see how we move forward. But Brian, you asked for the floor.
Thank you. Just quickly, if the theory of change is brought forward in the next iteration, I think it would be very helpful to include the assumptions in a table that underlie each of the links between activities, outputs, outcomes, and impacts. As you say, that's one of the real beauties of the theory of change, is that it makes you analyze your assumptions, but it's hard to understand the theory without seeing the assumptions. So if that could be brought forward, that would be great. Thanks.
I don't see any other observer or network member asking for the floor. I see Oli ask for the floor again. And I also see in the far distance our Wingo representative asking for the floor.
I can also see you, Karsten, but you are quite tall. Just to say that, just a question of procedure. If we are going to ask the Secretariat to go back with an iteration, then will there be an opportunity for us to provide comments that might help them in that iteration overnight? Because I would have more detailed comments. I didn't get into the substantive comments of the document, so I'm just a question of procedure.
Would you have your comments as track changes? You can just email them, or do you want to make them orally? So
I'm happy to do either.
Okay. Spencer?
Yeah, that was basically the same issue, but we can do both. Maybe I can just indicate maybe just 2 issues. One, I believe that we need to focus on technology as per the mandate. Technology as per the mandate. I think that has to be very clear. And the 3 functions must be clearly centralized in the document. I also believe that the role of the consortium should be recognized. I see a nice figure there, and it's not there. They have some repetition that we can get rid of course, and there are some areas where so a lot of numbers have been shown in the document, and to a large extent we may want to make sure that these numbers are synchronized in a form, because it is important that somebody who is not in this room might be reading this document. It could be entirely very confusing for them. So some of those issues may have to look at. Thank you.
Thank you for all the comments. I just tried to, I'm not even sure if I'm able to summarize, but maybe my understanding of our last half hour of discussion was that it was overall support, and advisory board members and observers saw the value in having such a document. We've also talked about strategic value of it. So maybe coming back to this hybrid approach mentioned, so maybe the idea of this future document in its next iteration would be more on strategic elements that would guide the operation, have a clearer forward-looking element of the CTCN activities. With this background, we could maybe, if we look to the current structure of the document, the initial part where we have this theory of change is maybe useful for somebody to understand, but maybe it's not necessary to have this as an opening of the document. So maybe this part is just as a proposal from our side. Could maybe be moved towards the annex. So then it should be self-standing and clear to see what is the tools used to do the strategic element. Similar, the review process and the ongoing review not necessarily needs to be in the document. So we could maybe just start somewhere on what's now currently part 10 and coming from the core functions of the CTCN and highlighting what would be the strategic ambition inside the core function. We'd basically not lose things. But I would also say there's a lot of important discussions we had at previous meetings, and I think the references to the resource mobilization strategy. And to the gender plan that are important to keep, but maybe to annex them, so that in the end the interested reader has a clear guidance from a lean, mean, and strategic document, program of work, and more detailed elements will be summarized in maybe 3, 4, 5 annexes. And so that in sense the quick reader knows what it's all about, where this organization aims for, but the detailed part would be in a set of annexes, and we can maybe discuss what is needed and what is not needed. Just be kind of trying to capture these elements. With this, Yuka, you want to briefly react?
Yeah, maybe one thing is that if you wish to have detailed recommendations and so on, then we need to get them somewhere in deadline today by mail if you want to have a new version which take on board that kind of suggestions, because we don't have maybe time because we have to go also to the joint report today. So there are some fixed definitely here which has to be made anyhow. I have to say that we have to re-look at this box 1, which is about quantitative impacts, aggregated impacts, especially on the greenhouse gas emission reduction. Might be thought that it was during the 10 years, so it's misleading if we say that it's 100 million or 100 million tons. And the other one is indeed there is a mistake on that box on the priority, this box 4 on the mitigation, priority mitigation actions. As I said, that these are not ours, these are the high-level champion list, and indeed we have our own list, we put it in, which you have seen already before. And that was actually the list I sent to the high-level champions. They just made their own mind on what kind of themes they wanted to have on them, so that's not our property. Totally making a new document in one night, 20 pages or so, is a bit challenging thing, and we might try to look, and you already gave good indications that we can move something to the annexes, and that helps us to make much more crispy document on that one, on the main strategic part of the document. May I also just say that our intention was indeed that to say something about the new second program of work, and what is important there for us was indeed telling about a regional approach, linking the POW with the theory of change, going to technical assistance in the new way, especially emphasizing fast technical assistance services, and looking at whether these priority adaptation and mitigation technical assistance would be we could upscale in among the more countries. looking specifically capacity building and networking, private sector engagement and learning, private sector engagement, monitoring, evaluation, reporting, and financing. And I think that also we have the gender guidance included. So we try to pick up something which were important for us. We also try to tell you where we are strong, that what is our advantage in among all the bodies of the world for technology assistance in climate, that why we are here. That's the convening power, reaching the governments through their NDs and so on. So the story is maybe there, maybe it's too large and too complicated for you or for the audience, and we try to maybe try to make a second version. I don't know how we succeed to satisfy all, but if you want to give more guidance, we need them pretty fast in order to bring something tomorrow. And then indeed, if you want to make another decisions on the procedure, that what shall we do with this paper? As Mark said, that we are ready to work on, of course, in the continuous basis.
Just trying to respond, so I speak under your control here. I would assume that you received a lot of guidance now from the different intervention, and bringing this into a new version overnight might be possible, but it's challenging. So, and it might, the question is to what would we aim by the end of the meeting? So we could, for instance, discuss on this new structure that was emerging from the different interventions, that's maybe just shifting parts around. And I'm not sure, and we also heard that full endorsement might become complicated, also giving the unclear guidance coming from the COPs. This might be could come later in time after the COPs. We talk about 2019. If we have to see what would be helpful for the hosting organizations and for the team to work on the strategic elements. So maybe if you would shift parts around, particularly making the core of the document shorter, leaner, more strategic, having less operational elements, maybe having less figures and impacts inside, because it should also be maybe more annex, so really being strategic. This could be tabled tomorrow to see how far we go, and then we can see if advisory board members would see that at least can take note of the progress, and then we agree on the further process. And coming back to Spencer's intervention, seeing how we can work intersessionally after the guidance and after the meeting was between the tech chairs and the CTCN representatives in early 2019, how to move this document further. So to sum up, if you have comments in writing already available, and we heard some have more detailed comments than others, you can maybe make them available to the secretariat. Step one, what you have available now. But it would be good to have them quickly with the team working on it. And maybe, Scott, would you be the dispatcher to? So if you make those points available, we will get a new version of the document tomorrow morning, have another iteration of comments, and give guidance, or at least take note of the work under doing and outline the further process. Is this agreeable? Comments, suggestions?
Deadline. 7 o'clock. By 19 hours. And,
okay. So,
email address.
So 7 o'clock Vienna time in Scott's inbox is the deadline for comments and track changes on English.
Just very quick, happy to email further comments. Just one that I think it's important to voice here, because it's coming up repeatedly about the different words to refer to countries. Emerging economies, emerging markets is all over the document. So we don't really know what emerging markets we are referring here to. So it's just better to be careful with that, those wordings, and revise all in the text. It says emerging economies when they want talk about developing countries, I guess. So it's just for careful review throughout the document. Thank you.
Ollie, you?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo Karsten's sort of compromise approach. I think, you know, the expectations of what can be done overnight, I think, need to be realistic. And I think some of the suggestions for some strategic thinking need the benefit, perhaps, of a little bit more time in order to satisfy the board members who are asking for some more strategic thought, and that's difficult to do in a rush. So I definitely agree with both perspectives of my colleague Ian, trying to use up most of our time as much as possible. And however, just maybe we can take the balance. I agree with the balanced approach that, you know, we'll leave some things noted, bracketed, or even spaces. I think it's important to make sure the Secretary understands that at least I'm speaking for myself here, that we're not expecting miracles overnight.
It's always good to expect miracles, but Scott.
Thanks, Mr. Vice Chair. Just a couple of things quickly. Claudia, if you have a preferred term, we'll use that one. Orly, I mean, several hundreds of hours have gone into various iterations of this document already, and we've tried our best to reflect diligently the guidance that we've received over the course of the summer, both on the conference call and then again in person in Bangkok. So, and if I could, track changes would actually be less helpful than specific comments and suggestions. Track changes just makes for a very, very, very messy version. And I think what we're looking at here is starting fresh and building elements back in. It'll be easy, obviously, where there are areas of general agreement, I think, which is, well, there are some areas of general agreement. And maybe we can put some options forward. But I know I've seen circulating some fairly thoughtful comments on proposed paths forward. So we'd be happy to receive those by email. I circulated the Danita review to the board about 20 minutes ago. So if you could you can just reply to that email. I'll consolidate everything, and then we can work on that basis. Thanks.
Thank you. I think this is commitment from the Secretariat side. We can park this item for now, and I would move. We would move to the next item, which is the joint annual report. And I think.
Okay.
Let's move to the agenda item 5. We have more than half an hour to go, and I think around an hour, yeah, for the discussion of the agenda item. So it's about the joint annual report of the TEC and CTCN for 2018, and Scott will deliver the presentation, and then we can have a round of the comments and questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As the chair mentioned, we have item 5 has two halves. One is the joint chapter of the joint annual report, which is prepared jointly by the chair and vice chair of both the TEC and the CTCN. This was presented to the TEC last week. They made a couple of edits that I will put before you, hopefully for your consensus and adoption. And then I will also present briefly the CTCN annual report. The annual report largely follows the presentation that Yuka gave yesterday. It's based on the annual operating plan and follows the same general format that it has taken over the course of the last 5 years. of operations of the CTCN. So that is to say that it provides an update on the center, and that's everything from staffing to turnover to the growth in the network. We obviously discussed, we added a couple of national designated entities over the course of the year. We touched briefly on the work that we do jointly. We leave most of that for the joint chapter itself. And then we provide an update on donor funding received, as well as yeah, I mean, I've got 2 slides. Sorry, can you? Yeah. Anyway, so as I was saying, it follows the same format that we've had in years past. And the piece I was at, it does provide an update on donor funding received, which, as we've discussed, is at a total of about 57.6 million, if I'm not mistaken. We then get into the 3 sort of specific service areas of the CTCN, which is to say, responding to requests for technical assistance. So again, 210 requests received. I think we're at 55 or 56 completed by this point. We talk about fostering collaboration, access to information, the strengthening of networks, the capacity building work that we're doing, and some outreach in terms of partnerships. Most interestingly, 2 things where we go a little bit deeper this time is on cross-cutting themes, which is to say communications and outreach, and the work that we're doing on gender. The UNFCCC actually gave the CTCN a fair bit of responsibility in terms of being more active on promotion of gender issues at COP23. So there's a little bit more detail on what we're doing on gender in this year's report. Similarly, we discuss communications and outreach and the success we've enjoyed with the CTCN web portal and a bunch of the information that's available there. There's a section on challenges and lessons learned, which again is broken into our 3 core service areas. We conclude with a series of key messages, which is, I believe, 8 or 9 paragraphs. The document, as I said, is available as AB 2018-12 5.1. I believe you've all had a chance to read it. So we're happy to respond to any questions or comments you may have. Yep. And having now said that, I will pause and say I will put up the revisions that the tech made to what was agreed between the chair and vice chair of the tech and the chair and vice chair of the AB for your consideration and hopeful approval. So you will let me know if this is, okay, that's too big. So the joint chapter itself is fairly short. The first paragraph talks about how we continued to strengthen our collaboration. We had a reference to the Sustainable Development Goals, which was removed as the tech does not have a mandate to engage on the SDGs. The second paragraph discusses how the 2 bodies of the technology mechanism support the implementation of the Paris Agreement, including advancing work on RD&D, thematic dialogue, incubators and accelerators, national systems of innovation with the GCF. Paragraph 3 indicates that we continue to work to strengthen linkages including by engaging in the meeting of the constituted bodies at COP23. And then paragraph 4 discusses the work that's undergone, the work we've undertaken together in 2018 on in the technical expert meetings, which again was the paragraph was largely left untouched. Only synergies and complementarity within were was removed. Paragraph 5 remains unchanged. We continue to collaborate on TNAs, including working with the adaptation committees and the LEG on aligning TNAs with national adaptation plans. Paragraph 6, again, one textual change in discussing how we participated in the gender dialogue and the PCCB at SB 48. And then paragraph 7 makes us less repetitive, indicating that in 2019 we will continue to collaborate in supporting countries on technology and in the implementation of the technology elements of NDCs and national adaptation plans. So if we could perhaps begin with consideration and hopeful agreement of the joint chapter of the JAR. But I will leave that to the chair.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you for presentations. Colleagues, if you have some comments or additional suggestions to the chapter, please feel free. Yes, Spencer.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the chairs for bringing up this document. I think first let me say that I agree with the changes, because I don't believe there is any value in not agreeing, because it will be then a repetitive process, and I think it is not good. We have gone through this before, and I really believe it does not bring any additional benefit to the mechanism. So the changes that were made, I think we agree with them. We would have hoped that the tech would have agreed with the document which came from the four co-chairs. We hope that they would have done that, because whichever meeting happens first, we will have this kind of problem unless we have the meetings at the same time. So if the CTCN sees the document, CTCN Advisory Board sees the document before the tech, we may want to do the same, and then there is no guarantee that the tech would not want to have another round and then another round again, and so on. So I believe, given the place we are right now, that we should just accept the changes here and let this joint chapter move forward. I don't see any value in having another iteration of going back to the tech, and I see no value in this. So I will say that we should just accept the document and go forward with it. Or we'll hope in the future that when the four co-chairs and the secretariats come up with a joint chapter, that we try to make very minimal changes to it, both on the tech and on the CTCN Advisory Board. So I just say we should go ahead with the document from my point of view.
Thank you very much, Spencer. Thank you for valuable comments. So, yes, Mark, please.
Yeah, there is maybe one small change I would recommend, and I think it's editorial, so perhaps it would not cause the problems that you mentioned, Spencer. It appears in paragraph 5, where there's the sentence, it would be the second sentence. The tech also cooperated with the CTCN and UNEP DTU. The more proper way to refer to that would be the UNEP DTU partnership, which is the formal name of our collaborating center in Denmark. And I think that's just editorial, and I hope that would be acceptable. It just makes it correct.
Thank you. It will be definitely reflected. Are there any? Claudia first, and then Spencer. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just to let the AB board, and I'm talking with my tech hat now,
that we got a mandate from the TEC to finalize this together with the TEC with the chair and vice chair of the AB of the CTCN. So of course, if there are some minor changes, we have this mandate from the TEC to finalize it, so it doesn't have to go back now to the TEC. Thank you.
Thank you. Spencer, you wanted to have a floor again?
Yeah, well, I think this is very interesting, I mean, and very useful. Otherwise, the proposal that came from Mark, I would have asked that the advisory board accepts the document as coming out of the TEC and ask the full co-chairs. They can do that on their own responsibility to whether or not they want to add partnership or not should not be dealt with here, but the four co-chairs could do it on their own responsibility. So I don't think we should go back and forth with this document. Even a small change could be very significant sometimes. So I think, in principle, we should try to accept the document as coming from the co-chairs, and if there is any changes, put back the responsibility on the co-chairs to do it, not that we should be doing it. So as I see it here, the document which came from the TEC actually come from the four co-chairs, the one that the document with the changes. So because that is the process, that is what we agreed on, that we will entrust the four co-chairs to finalize the document, and that will be the case.
Thank you, Spencer. As far as we have Claudia here as the chair of TEC, and our mandate is to finalize the document here, I think even with a small editorial change, it will not be a problem. I guess, Scott? So can we agree on that? Great. Thank you. So it's agreed. So we have a first item agreed officially. So if we can have a comments now for the joint annual report, especially for the document AB/2018/12/5.1. If you have some comments or suggestions or need revisions. Yes, Spencer.
I'm going to break the ice again. Of course, I think paragraph 5 will have to be dealt with maybe later on in the document. I think it waits on some decisions that we will have to make later. So just to flag that. I had another. I believe that, in my view, we got it right in terms of what we were asking for, in terms of the messaging on financing, positive enough, but at the same time representative of our situation. So I think we could live with the message that coming on finance. I heard many persons in the room asking us to be a little more positive, despite we are operating at not what we thought we would be at this point in time. So let me compliment the document. I believe it's something that we can move forward with, but I just wait on the other comments.
Yeah, you're totally right that just from the secretary point of view, for your information, we will keep the brackets on the para 5 on the first sub para 1. The weight endorsement on the financial statement. Also on the para 18, the table 1 will be corrected according to what we have discussed about additional funds coming, or fund have already come in. The same para 9 when we are referring to that total contributions on para 19. And then para 29, we will fix the figures on that, analysis which we have made on the 41st technical assistance projects. And I think that there is still one paragraph to fix, and that is on the para 73 key messages. We are referring to the total contributions which need to be revised according to what we have discussed.
Should I ask them to approve at this stage, or we should skip it?
No, let's do that.
Thanks, Scott. Yes, Mette, please.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, just a comment, a general comment, and I'm not sure whether I have the fix, but I do strongly remember the COP asking the technology mechanism they requested the technology mechanism to monitoring and having a monitoring and evaluation system in place to report on impacts. I've read the decision carefully. It doesn't say that we should report on impact. It said that we should have an M&A system in place to monitor impact. But I also think that even if we don't manage this time, we should, a report to the COP should start with the results. So, I think that would have been the ideal start. That if we had 3 or 5 results that could come up right front, that would be good. But then on the table 1 on the financial support secured for the CTCN, there is the asterisk connected to the Norwegian contribution and the contribution of the United States. This is there. So two donors have an asterisk there for earmarking. I think there are other earmarking from other countries. So I don't really understand why these 2 countries are being highlighted. I suggest that the asterisk being taken out. Regarding the financial reporting on the funding situation in para 20, I do have a question. If this, it says in the second sentence that this funding allowed the CTCN to avoid a near-term shortfall in its financial situation. I would like an explanation to what does this actually say? And I also wonder, did we agree that, did we hear that in 2019 the plan is to take care of the rest of the, to answer out the technical assistance that have not yet been prioritized? If that is the plan, maybe that can be highlighted also in this paragraph to showcase that this is being taken care of, if that was right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mette. Ringo, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I have some suggested new text and a proposal for the advisory board representing the collective groups of the Ringo, the Engos and the Bingos. And it really relates and refers to the length of office. So it's something that will impact the Secretariat, something that will be a decision that will have to be made at COP. But if you go back to the constitution of the advisory board, it clearly outlines that the government representatives can exist within the advisory board for 2 or 3 years with the potential to expand that by an additional 2 years. while it also outlines that the constituency, the 3 representatives of the identified constituency can only stay in a term of office no longer than 1 year. Going back in 2012, that seems very sensible, but in practical terms, it is not sensible, and I'll articulate why. In effect, it means that new representatives to the board will just, at a maximum, attend 2 meetings, potentially being nominated a week before the first meeting. So having quite a large hill to climb to identify the amount of information they need for that first meeting. And once they've built some capacity, then they enter their second meeting, and which is effectively their last meeting, and they're gone. So in practical terms, it doesn't allow the individual to represent the constituency in a meaningful way, whether you are a Ringo, a Bingo, or an Engo. At the moment, I'm just speaking for the Ringos. And I think that that is a significant impact in terms of the role and the place that the representative plays in the board, and also the potential impact of the representative in providing outreach to their respective groups, in my case, the Ringos. Now, theoretically, you could say that the calendar year does last for a full year rather than 6 months, which it seems that if you get nominated a week before, say like I did, a week before this meeting, so, and then in 6 months' time is my second meeting and I'm gone, but actually in a year's time, or just less than a year's time, potentially there is a third meeting. So my proposal would be to change the composition, to provide a note within this agenda item, bring it back to the COP through, I believe, the SUBSTA. I look for guidance from the UNFCCC Secretariat there, that articulates that the constituency members shall serve a term of 2 years. In terms of equity, it would reflect at least half of the government representatives who have an option of 2 years or 3 years, but they also have an option of being renewed. I'm not requesting a renewal, I'm just requesting an extension from 1 year to 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Can we ask if you have a language for that in order for discussion?
I can certainly provide language, but if you refer to the documentation itself, the decision text refers to paragraph 9 of the decision text, and I don't want to feel like I'm a negotiator, but it's 2012-8. The paragraph 9. So the representatives of the advisory board referred to in paragraph 1G above shall be eligible to serve for a maximum term of office of 1 year. So my suggestion is to replace the 1 with the 2. And then just for those who aren't familiar with the decision text, if I go back to what 1G text is, 3 representatives, with 1 being selected by each of the following UNFCCC observer organizations' constituencies, taking into account balanced geographical representation, environmental non-governmental organizations or ENGOs, business and industry non-governmental organizations, BINGOs, and research and independent non-governmental organizations, RINGOs, with relevant expertise in technology, finance, or business, received by the host organization of the Climate Technology Centre, CTC, taking into account balanced geographical representation. So the paragraph I'm looking to amend is just a change of 1 word, but it does refer to that paragraph, which is 1G, under Annex 2, the Constitution of the Advisory Board of the Climate Technology Centre Network.
Thank you so much. Ayan, you had a question, yeah?
Thank you. Just two comments on the joint annual report here. Paragraph 27, in similar vein to what Mate was saying earlier, the 27 is the first sentence is about securing sustained funding to enable the CTCN to continue to deliver on its mandate is an issue of concern. there's no problem with that. We fully agree with that. But then the last sentence, I think, is somewhat repetitive and also says that the absence of sufficient, predictable, sustained financing places the future viability of the CTCN and technology development and transfer services it provides to developing countries at risk. So for me, it's kind of repeating the point, and also it's somewhat dramatic, because I think the point was made earlier in the meeting that the CTCN has had funding every year, so maybe we want to try and keep the tone positive, and I would just suggest deleting that last sentence. And then the other comment I wanted to make was skipping forward to the end, paragraph 76 and the key messages. We refer to independent reviews of the CTCN that have demonstrated partners and customers of the CTCN acknowledge added value of the CTCN and so on. So we're saying reviews. So I'm assuming either that's a typo or we're referring to both the CTCN independent review and also this new Danida review. I think it could actually be quite nice to be able to reference the Danida review here. But if we do that, I'd suggest we have footnotes to both the CTCN independent review and then the Danida review. And perhaps we can check with them, but if it sounds like they've shared it with the board, if we're able to provide a link to both of those reviews, that would be quite a nice way for all the parties to see the new reviews in time for the COP.
Thank you. And what you wanted to have a floor also? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair. I have a few comments. First of all, I agree with Mette that it would be good to highlight the results first, so if possible to switch places on section B and C. And I also see you highlighted here, but it would be good to update the total funding committed based on the discussion we had this morning on financial matters with a contribution from Norway. And on para 20, I agree with what Ian just said about the second sentence and the last sentence. I think could be deleted. And I think regarding the last sentence, we state that $5 million have been used in total for 40 TA requests. So it seems like it's maybe more a priority thing so far. And regarding the para 27, I think this is certainly a challenge, but not so much. Maybe it could be moved to the section on challenges and lessons learned. And I also agree with Ian to delete the last sentence in that paragraph. And on paragraph 29, I think we should say there that it's $5 million in total for the first 40 TA requests. And I also think after para 29, we should add a paragraph on short describing the methodology. On paragraph 30, I wonder if it would be good to include something about the distribution of responses and how much have come from the network, if possible, to add a sentence on that. And also on the graph in paragraph 30, maybe if it would be possible to add a sentence on the trend of the TA requests in 2018. So for instance, I take that back. On paragraph 32, I think that could be rephrased a little bit. It's not really clear, so not so easy to read. And the last sentence there, that we see an increasing emphasis on direct alignment between the technical assistance requests and the country's NDCs. That's very interesting. So if we could make that into an own paragraph and add a sentence or two would be great. Maybe on paragraph 34, is that related to the methodology on estimating the intended impacts? Then maybe that paragraph could be moved to come right after the estimation of the intended impacts. And then I suggest to add a section or a paragraph to give a summary of the reviews, to summarize their main findings, but also their main recommendations, or to move, because currently I only see this in the paragraph 76 and 77, so maybe to move those two last paragraphs and give more of a summary of the main findings and main recommendations. And I agree with Ian that it would be good to give the full references of both the reviews, or at least the Ernst and Young review. And maybe also, if possible, to add a para on the responses from the CTCN that we discussed yesterday and what has been done so far. Yeah, that was all. Thank you.
Thank you, Moa. Spencer, you were asking the floor? Or?
Thank you, Chair. I kind of hesitate to do this because I don't think we would like to negotiate this document to in the manner in which we do at the COP. But I think I need to respond to some issues here and maybe put some others on the table, and then we go determine how we're going to go forward with this. So maybe I could just say I agree with a lot of things that have been said, but we can't have everything in this document. This is, I think we need to agree that we cannot have everything in this document. And then it's late already, so I think we will have to know how we will proceed. In paragraph 8, it speaks to smaller valued technical assistance. That to me is something which I believe we need to look at. Smaller valued technical assistance, that terminology. I could go down to, well, Ian, you know I'm going to come back to your funding paragraph. So I will go to paragraph 20. I'm not quite sure what was the proposal for paragraph 20. If I got it right, my understanding is that we keep paragraph 20, or so I want a clarification on paragraph 20. Paragraph 21 speaks to only technical assistance, funding for CTCN technical assistance, and I believe that we need to funding for all of the functions of the CTCN, not only for technical assistance. So it's just a small point here. But I want to get clarity as to exactly what happens with paragraph 20, because I'm not sure if I understand the proposals very well. Paragraph 23 seems to be a typo or a word missing somewhere. So maybe the Secretariat would want to look at that. And I notice also that in paragraph 24, 25, and maybe other paragraphs, this is written as if it is today, but this document will be tabled some other time. So when I want to look at how we do the wording, like the CTCN will have completed by the end of, I think it will access 2 million. Maybe we might want to look at how we word those, what they're going to be doing by the time of this document will be considered. As I said, I like paragraph 27. There were proposals to remove some aspects of it. I don't know if we want to negotiate this, but I guess to me it was a very good and very sensible way in which it is done. But other parties have problems with it, so maybe we might want to look at it a little closer. Paragraph 29 speaks to the CTCN fully operational, both the number of requests and the progression continues to increase. But somehow I think we got a sense that it slowed. So I think we need to clarify this. I'm not quite sure if 29 will create more noise at the COP, and the whole question of avoided costs, whether or not it is at this stage ready to be in this document with a number of 40 million. So just a point. Maybe we can say word to the extent that we expect to have significant avoid costs of significant magnitude. But I'm not quite sure if this 40 million, if that could be defended given the sort of methodologies that problems that we might have in this. So I think we mentioned in 34 there is a reference to the Sustainable Development Goals, which again was taken out of the joint. Maybe we can do the same here, and if at all refer to sustainable development as is in the Paris Agreement. And then in 34 we also don't have the adaptation aspect. And I believe that in this document, the issue of capacity building also, I think we have some good issues there, and the niche on capacity building is well articulated. So I will stop here, but I only would like to know how we're going to proceed to finalize this document, given the changes I've heard. I haven't been able to assimilate all of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Spencer.
On the proposal from the Ringo constituency on behalf of the other constituencies, you might remember that this same issue has been in front of us 2016. And in that report from I read it, that advisory board on its 8th meeting was supportive of the request on behalf of the environmental non-governmental organization, business and industry non-governmental organization, research and independent non-governmental organization, advisory board members, that their maximum term be extended from 1 year to 2 years to allow these constituencies to better contribute to advisory board discussions and to bring their terms of office in line with the other members. However, it was noted that this is a decision that must be made by the conference of the parties. And the only way how advisory board can convey this message to COP is indeed put it in the report, and then it is in the hands of those who negotiate then to take it from there. So I just wanted to explain that one, and I think Scott has some other responses.
Thank you, Hugo. Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. Mo, if I could clarify, your question on TA, did you want clarification as to requests that were coming from the network or requests that were going to the network?
I thought of requests going to the network.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that'll do it for me. Thanks.
Thanks, Claudia. You had a question, comment?
Just some comments on the report. So on paragraph 20, let me go back to my paragraph 20. I have a question here because it says CTCN continues to experience fiscal challenges. So is this fiscal challenges or funding challenges, or I was not very clear on what the message is there. I guess it's regarding the funding situation. So in that regard, I think it should be clarified. Paragraph 27. I would like to second Spencer on the need of having to have a procedure on how to deal with the suggestions of revising this paragraph. I think it belongs both to the funding section and also to the challenges section. So maybe just put there also, if this is the proposal to move it, I think some version of this paragraph should also talk to the funding section, and then some section might talk to the challenging situation on the CTCN funding. I do believe some wording could be improved, but I do think that some elements talking about the sufficient and sustained financing issues that are faced by the CTCN should remain. Paragraph 32. It is, of course, not always the case that the requests will come from the TNAs, since countries have other processes to identify their technology needs. So I find a little bit, working a little bit on that wording would be useful. And also, we are missing there the NDCs and NAPs reference, since not only about NDCs, so the adaptation component should also be captured there. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. Matthew?
Thank you. I'm just responding to Yuka's intervention. And Yuka, thanks very much for reminding me that it was brought in front of it before, and at the time the advisory board were supportive of, but it just didn't proceed with the next step in terms of getting it onto the report that goes to the COP. So what I would, I can suggest where I think it might logically fit in that report, or I may ask if Bert or Juana can talk about where these things would normally go in terms of a report. But from my perspective, there is a clear paragraph 2, which it is paragraph 2 now, but it may not be paragraph 2 in the future, but where it talks about the new members. So there's a natural time around membership there to introduce a potential request for change. But again, the request is just that it would feature in the report rather than just a discussion around the advisory board. And then with the plan that if the parties agree at COP, that the term would change. But I'm looking for guidance, I guess, from the UNFCCC Secretariat and, of course, anyone who wants to provide.
Let me clarify. It was in the report, in the official report. It was included. This particular what I read was in the report of the advisory board. And it went further, and it was an official UNFCCC report to COP. So it went all the way there.
So what does that mean, Yuka?
It meant that what happened was then that when the joint annual report was discussed among the parties in the subsidiary body meeting, nobody made a proposal that this particular paragraph of our report would have been changed into a recommendation to the COP to be as a part of the decision for the COP. So that didn't happen in that meeting of the subsidiary body.
So, Madam Chair, can I come back in? Possibly then, I would ask that it features again, goes back to the substa with the expectation that potentially some parties would raise it at substa, which I have no control over.
Okay, thank you. Matthew, please.
Thank you for coming back again, and sorry for not being clear on para 20. I think that was kind of my way to say that we needed to do something without starting negotiating. When I've looked at it more closely now, I think maybe I understand the second sentence to say that the funding that was pledged at COP22 helped the CTCN, also secured actually funding for the CTCN in 2017 and 18. So maybe we should say something like that instead of a shortfall. So this funding allowed or secured funding for the CTCN in 2018 or 17 or 18 or whatever is the proper year to include there. So that's to replace the last part of that sentence. I also suggest that when we talk about the fiscal challenges or the funding challenges, whatever is the right word there, that we could add to that sentence that a resource mobilization strategy has been adopted and will be followed up, because then it sees that, you know, we have actually taken this on board and try to do something with it. And for the last part of that sentence, where we talk about the technical assistance that has not been prioritized so far, maybe we can say that the plan for 2019 is that these requests will be responded to, if that is correct. And that was in my first intervention, a question to the Secretariat, if we can say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mette. Spencer, please.
Thank you, Chair. I ask for the floor to support the proposal made by Mark on this. I think that we have already agreed on this. So I hope that we can also have some language in this document to put forward this issue. So to extend the term for the bingos and so on. So I want to support this. I'm not quite sure what I'm hearing. I mean, do we have to drop the last paragraph in 20, or do we want to say, as a result, some requests for technical assistance submitted which have not been prioritized will now be prioritized? I mean, what do you want? Because you can't have it all. You have to have the reality. And it was not prioritized because of it, and that's a fact. So the question is, do you want us to remove that fact and add an next fact, or do you want us to maintain both of them?
No, I totally agree with you that we should absolutely be factual, and that we can say that in 2018, if it's correct, or, you know, the good time period here, to say that so far there is some requests that has not been responded to, but that the plan is for 2019 to address these issues.
That's clear. And the issue with the resource mobilization, and you mentioned also, is it also for this that a resource mobilization strategy has been agreed? It also goes in 20? Okay. But do we have a target for that resource mobilization strategy? Maybe you should ask the Secretary that. Do we have a target? Because we're going to spend some money to put that in place.
Yeah, if you look back to the other document, which is the program of work, as an annex, we have the resource mobilization strategy. And I remember that there are some indicative targets on there. That means that it's an Annex 2, financing the second program of work, and that that annex has been derived from the resource mobilization strategy, and there, indeed, we have some targets like bilateral donors, 10 million annually, multilateral institutions, 2 to 5 million. Bilateral in-kind and pro bono support, 1 to 2.5 million, and so on. So, but we didn't foresee that we should put all of these into now on the report. That's a bit makes complicated and too prescriptive, actually. So in a way, but there are exactly, and that's why we have given you this graph, which tells something about that what we are anticipating the financing, what happens to the financing to the CTCN, both core and additional sources, and where we are going for next 4 years. But we have taken note on what have been suggestions. I think that we could produce you some new language on those paragraphs, which hopefully will meet consensus. So we are ready to work on those.
If you have any further comments or suggestions that we could incorporate in the document and to provide with it tomorrow for hopefully for approval. No. Okay, so tomorrow we will have a very tight and tough schedule, I assume, because today Secretariat will do its best to somehow finalize the report, the program of work and annual operating plan for your review for tomorrow. And I hope we can approve, if not all of them, at least all of them. So let's be positive. So for today, we can, if there are no any other issues, we can close the meeting. And thank you for your comments and see you tomorrow at 9:30 again. Yeah, and please, Tarek, if you can provide information about.
Yes, please, you're all invited to a reception here in the VIC. Is Katharina here to guide us? Yes, please. It's in the
Downstairs on the ground floor next to the cafeteria where we had lunch in the morning. Right next to there is a restaurant and the reception is already ready for us.
proceed there directly. Thank you.